Good afternoon in our TAG TV series to meet Canadian politicians. Today we are joined with MP Andrew Scheer, who is a candidate for Conservative Party leadership race. Andrew also served as 35th Speaker of House of Commons. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much for having me.
We would like to know about your vision. How would you lead party as well as country?
Well, I think it's critically important that the Conservative Party has a positive message for Canada. As I think back to the last election, it wasn't our policies that were unpopular. People were happy that we balanced the budget. They were happy that we cut taxes. They appreciated our foreign policy that stood up for our allies around the world. But we had a negative tone. We had a negative impression, and I want to change that. I want to always talk about the positive effects that conservative policies have on lifting people out of poverty, creating prosperity, creating opportunities for Canadians, and that's how I think we can win in 2019 by showing Canadians that we have something aspirational for the country.
Thank you, Andrew. And I would like to introduce our panelists today as well. We have Mr. Asif Javed, very well-known blogger, Urdu columnist, writes for many media outlets. Thank you, Asif, for joining us. And Asfandyar Wadiwala is a very great friend, and also he's very active in Conservative Party of Canada. And then Meena Chopra is a well-known writer, poet, and artist, and an editor of a newspaper in Toronto. We have Kamni, we have Ravina, Halima Sadia, TAG TV's managing director, as well as a very well-known TV anchor. So I'll start from Asif, if you have anything to ask Andrew.
I would like to ask you a critical question that it might be difficult for you to answer, but nowadays a great controversy is running around in Canada. The radical people have made their hideouts in political parties in Canada, like Liberal Party of Canada, Conservative, and the NDP, in the disguise of community leadership. And they deliberately want to break the inclusiveness and the pluralness of the society, and they have created a controversy here in Canada by tabling a motion that is called Motion 1 MO3 in the Parliament. How would you cope with this situation if you come in the Parliament in a position, holding a position to do some decisions over it?
Well, I can tell you that I've received a lot of emails and phone calls about Motion 103. There are a lot of people with very serious concerns about not only the effects of this motion, but also what's behind it. You know, what's the motivation? Why, at this point in time, why are we seeing a motion like this proposed to the House of Commons? I have a lot of concerns with M103, and let me just say right from the beginning, I will be voting against Motion 103. I think I want that. That's very important to articulate right away, for a few reasons. First of all, in the preamble to the motion, it talks about how Canada is increasingly becoming a country with fear and hate and it's all this negative language, which I don't believe is true. Canada is a peaceful country. Yes, there are incidents, there are troubling things that happen to Christian communities, to Jewish communities, to Muslim communities, of course, and we have tools in place with our local police forces and our local communities to make sure that people who perpetrate those types of things are held to account for them. But generally, Canada is a wonderful place, a peaceful place where we tolerate and celebrate each other's religious and cultural backgrounds. So I believe that the entire frame of the motion is put out there in a sort of fear-mongering, you know, to try to whip up a concern about something that is conclusively not there. The second reason why I'm voting against it is because it's not inclusive. It singularly highlights one faith over all. It talks about discrimination against people of all faiths, but it only mentions one particular faith. And I think that when you're trying to present an inclusive tone, that you shouldn't do that, that you should either list them all or don't list any and make sure that not one, because Canadians are concerned that they might see that only one faith is being highlighted for that. Islamophobia is not defined in the motion. what does Islamophobia mean? To me, it might mean unjust discrimination where people are fired or not allowed to buy a condo because of their Muslim faith. I would be against that kind of discrimination, absolutely. But there are places around the world where these types of motions, the term Islamophobia, is used to stifle free speech and legitimate criticisms of a particular religion or an interpretation of that religion. And I don't want to see our freedom of speech hampered in this country at all. So for those reasons, I'm voting against it. I think the Liberals are trying to play identity politics, divisive politics. They're trying to create a problem and pit one group of Canadians against another for their own political purposes, and I can't stand that kind of politics. You are correct. This motion doesn't just go away. It does call, if it's passed, it calls on the Heritage Committee to start turning the wheels of government to develop a strategy. And that's where a lot of people have concerns about is how does the federal government start to address this issue? Because if it results in you and I losing our freedom of speech, or down the road, if we look down and see, well, this is where we started, but now we've lost fundamental freedoms, a lot of Canadians are very concerned about that. We already have laws against hate speech, against incitements to violence, against discrimination based on faith. To me, this is quite simply an unnecessary motion that is allowing the Liberals to play divisive identity politics, and we should reject it. And I hope members of every faith community, including the Muslims, the Islamic faith, recognize that this is not an authentic, genuine attempt at building relationships between different cultural and faith groups. This is a political tool that the Liberals are using, and they're using the Islamic community as a pawn in their political games.
Thank
Yes,
you very
please. SP.
Andrew Shells, we welcome you to Tech TV, you and your team.
Thank you.
Being an old conservative from inception of the party, I would like to know what is your platform and the manifesto you have for the leadership race. Out of the 14 candidates, you are one of them, and why a conservative would vote for you. Just tell us that.
Sure. Well, I have many policies that are probably too many to go into detail on your show here today, but I can summarize them in a few ways. Yes. So first of all, I will repeal the carbon tax that the Liberals are promising to put in. Here in Ontario, you know that the costs have gone up for hydro, for home heating. It's been a disaster under Kathleen Wynne's government, and the people who designed that government are now working in Ottawa. And the carbon tax is going to be devastating for our economy. I will repeal the carbon tax. I've also signed on to a very ambitious timeline to balance the budget. I have committed to balancing the budget in 2 years.
Wow.
And that's ambitious, and a lot of people say it's too ambitious, but I think it's very important because every year that we run deficits, we're borrowing money from our children and spending it today. We're taking money out of their future prosperity. And I want to send a message to every department, every public servant, every bureaucrat, we need to balance the budget. If we give them a 5 or a 10-year timeline, it'll be 15 or 20 years before it ever gets balanced. So I'm going to hold them to account and have that aggressive timeline. I also want to lower taxes for new parents. Right now, when families have children and they go on maternity leave or parental leave, those benefits are taxed. I want to make those tax-free. And I will also bring in a tax credit for independent schools. So parents who choose to send their children to an independent school can have a tax credit for part of their tuition. And I want to lower taxes for small businesses. Small businesses are an engine of this economy, and every time the Liberals raise payroll taxes, whether it's CPP or income taxes, it kills jobs. It reduces the number of opportunities for young people entering into the workforce. So I'll lower taxes on small businesses as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Meena Chopra, please.
We are a diverse country, and that is our beauty. But being a diverse country, we are kind of developing into ghettos. Do you think that we should unite? And if you think that we should unite, different cultures should come on common platforms, what would you do about it? And also, what would be your message to new immigrant regarding this?
Well, first of all, there has to be an emphasis in our immigration policies on integration and promoting the cross connection between different groups, that we're a multicultural country, we're a diverse country. We celebrate the heritage, the faith, the culture that people bring with them to this country. But we have to make sure that that is all being done in a context of becoming Canadian and celebrating the reasons why people came here in the first place, because of the freedom, the equality, the tolerance that we enjoy, and always putting that emphasis on opportunities. The message for new Canadians that I would say is that the values that new Canadians bring with them, people who come to this country, they are conservative values. The vast majority of people who come to this country are doing it because they want a better opportunity. They're very entrepreneurial. They start businesses. They hire people. They create prosperity in their communities. They want strong families. They're very close with their local communities, and those are all principles that the Conservative Party espouses. So my challenge, if I become leader of the party, is to connect with new Canadians and say, maybe you haven't voted Conservative in the past because of the image of the party or the image of the Liberal Party, but when you look at the actual policies, your values are Conservative values and our values are your values. So let's build those bridges. Let's accept each other's point of view. I hope will be convinced that the Conservative Party is an inclusive party and celebrates the addition to our country from new Canadians. And then we can talk about our policies, and you'll see that whether it's cutting taxes, encouraging businesses, strong communities, safe communities, making sure that dangerous criminals are kept out of our communities, you'll see that the values, the things that will work to make a better country, are the policies that the Conservative Party is offering.
Halima Sadia.
My question will be regarding education. When we educate people, basically we challenge their ability to come out and understand better the system they are in, and they are more having gratitude towards what they have. So recently the government has introduced for the youth to have free education after a while. So Conservatives are doing, if you are going to be in power, what do you see for the youth to get educated? Because getting educated means we are putting our strengths towards our future, where we can bring out brains who will be produced within our country to better act for the things we are striving as a nation and which we always were standing for. So I would like to know the stance of Conservatives regarding that.
Well, the particular policy that I understand is happening in Ontario is largely under the provincial area of jurisdiction. And I, as a Prime Minister, would allow and respect the province's ability to innovate in different spheres, whether it's healthcare or especially in education. My policy of allowing parents to have a tax credit for tuition for independent schools will help many, many more parents put their children in the school system that best fits them, or in the school that best fits their child. So I think that'll provide a lot more opportunities for parental choice in education. I also think that it's very important that we look at what our society needs and what our economy needs, because yes, education is key, but it's not just getting a degree for the sake of getting a degree. We need to have a better link between what the workforce is demanding, what the needs are in our economy, and making sure that young people, students, are not all steered in one particular track or another. We need support for skills training, for apprenticeships, for the highly skilled jobs that will be required to be filled. We need a wide diversity of educational opportunities. And in the past, for many years, it was all geared towards one track in universities with a particular emphasis on one area. We need to broaden that and say, look, the economy needs highly skilled engineers, highly skilled people, electricians. We don't just need one type of degree being available for children as well. And if I can just very briefly talk about a related issue, and that is many people come to this country, many new Canadians arrive with highly qualified training behind them. They have very high levels of education, but they can't get it recognized in Canada. And so we have people with professional degrees, working retail, or working entry-level positions in different jobs, and they could be filling those roles that our economy needs. There's not enough leadership at the federal level to make sure that all the provinces are recognizing certifications and professional qualifications for people who come to this country They suffer when they can't work to their full potential, and our economy suffers because we don't have them contributing in the way that they should be.
My other question will be very brief, but nobody talks about that because I believe strongly as a person who's related to the media that artists play a very big role in enhancing the cultural values of a society. So our governments never talk about how they are going to treat the artist and art to enhance the culture. So what conservatives are going to do that, because we have so many things which we talk about under heritage or anything, but we never talk about how our art is going to promote the social values. It's a very big tool. It has always been to enhance the social values. So what is your take on that?
Well, I think the artistic community is a very important part of our society, our culture, and yes, even our economy. Canada exports our cultural products around the world. There are artists and performers that have succeeded here in Canada, then go and represent Canada on the world stage. Our government, when the Conservatives were in power, we did provide steady funding for the artistic community. What I'd like to do is get the government out of the content creation, the delivery of content, and just allow communities or individual artists or Canadians to be able to tell their stories. But I think where there has been some controversies in the past is when the government decides, when we have government officials and deciding this project or that, we're going to buy that painting or fund this TV show. That when some of those creations are hard to understand or controversial, then the government gets a lot of blame. Well, why are you funding that? Why are you funding that? I think it's better if we empower local communities, artists themselves, and artistic associations and groups to fund those types of projects. And we also have to make it easier for the private sector to sponsor the arts. In the history of the world, yes, governments support the artistic community as well, but the private sector also should be playing a role in funding and promoting Canadian culture. And we can do that with tax credits, we can do that with matching funds, but we could have much more resources available to the artistic community if we were able to leverage the private sector as well and get them involved in telling our wonderful Canadian stories.
So, Andrew, before we take a few more questions from panelists, I do have a question.
Yes, yes.
As you said that if you get elected party leader and then get elected as Prime Minister of Canada, you will balance the budget within 2 years. But what we have seen so far in 1 year time, Liberal, they have put us like sort of over 30 billion deficit, which was left by surplus budget by Prime Minister Harper. And if the situation goes that way in next 3 years, Canadians are anticipating more than 100 billion deficit. So how would you be able to manage that huge debt then?
Well, it won't be easy. We'll have to work hard. And I was a member of Parliament when we balanced the budget in the last Parliament, and it takes some tough decisions. I can tell you that there's I don't know if there was a single time when I was in Ottawa in my office as a member of Parliament where somebody asked for a meeting with the request that we spend less money. The request is always that Ottawa spends more money. So there's intense pressure on the budget to always be spending more. But that being said, we have to remember that the first $6 or $7 billion that Trudeau spent after becoming Prime Minister was not even spent in Canada. He was traveling around the world and funding different projects through the UN and different things. It didn't create a single job here in Canada. So there's some low-hanging fruit that we can, as Conservatives, come and say, okay, well, we don't need to spend that anymore. We need to balance the budget. I also believe that our economic policies will grow the private sector quickly and help with the revenue side, because with a more dynamic economy, there'll be more revenues flowing to the government. So I know it's ambitious, but I feel very strongly about it because I know that Justin Trudeau is going to do to my children the same thing that Pierre Trudeau did to my generation, and that is leave us with a legacy of debt that we're still paying off today. So we have to have an ambitious target. The Liberals I believe the Liberals federally are doing what the Liberals provincially are doing, and that is they don't care about the deficit. They know that when they eventually lose, that'll be the Conservatives' problem. And so they're just going to rack it up as high as they can. But we have to be disciplined. We have to have an ambitious target.
A few more questions from panelists. So
Yeah, Andrew, I've got two questions for you, which is a great concern, especially to me and other Conservatives, that as you are aware, that soon as Mr. Trudeau took over, He abolished the office of the religious freedom. That was the biggest setback. But I would also like to regret to state that our opposition party did not stood very firm for this bill. That I saw the whole proceedings, but the opposition was too weak. I know they are in majority, but at the same time, it was abolished in when one signature of the ruling party. My second question is, we are very concerned about the influx of refugees. They are not being vetted properly, and lots of unpleasant things are happening in Canada, which off and on media reports, but that are not been highlighted. So out of the 14 candidates, I have heard 10. None of them have said about, only except one candidate, about the vetting of refugees, because Canada has been made a dumping ground now. What is OIC doing? What are the oil-rich countries doing for those refugees? They belong to their faith, their religion. Why Canada is being made a dumping ground?
Well, I will say that, first of all, on your first question, the Office of Religious Freedom played an invaluable role promoting and protecting human rights, specifically around freedom of faith and freedom of conscience.
For all Canadians.
For all Canadians and also around the world.
Around the world.
And I believe that Canada had a very strong voice against some of the atrocities that we've been seeing and against some of the injustices that continue to exist in many countries around the world, where people are often threatened with their lives just for the faith that they hold and that they ascribe to. We did denounce it. We did do our very best to highlight it. And you know, when you're in opposition, it's hard to often get the media to pay attention to the important work that it did. And as you said, the Liberals had a majority and just railroaded it through. So I have committed to reinstate the Office of Religious Freedom. On the second question on the refugee policy, I do agree that we have a misplaced priority. When the Trudeau Liberals were bringing in 25,000 Syrian refugees, you could tell that they had a political target that they had given themselves of by the end of the year. And everything else would be sacrificed for that political target. Yeah. And when you do the math and you figure out that 25,000 divided by how many officers we had, I believe the figure was maximum 2 minutes per application case was spent. It was in the single digits. So clearly there was not enough emphasis on security. I believe that Canada can always play a role in welcoming refugees. We have to remember that there is more than one area around the world with refugees. My mother-in-law does a lot of good work with a lot of people who have come from refugee camps in Africa, and they have family members still waiting in those camps.
Refugees are welcome. Canada has always been very tolerant.
Yes, but
the question of bringing them was not right. The proper way of vetting was not done. That's what we feel. Right. We have our own problems also in Canada. We as Canadians and taxpayers are suffering in many areas.
Mm-hmm. And you raised, you talked a little bit about the capacity for the government to welcome these. And this is something that I denounce very strongly. The Liberal government cut the number of privately sponsored refugee applications that could be made. Now, when a private sponsorship goes through, that is often supported by a community, whether it's an ethnic community or a faith community or just a volunteer community. And when they welcome that refugee, they help provide the resources. They make sure that they have access to English language training, that they can be taken to get their driver's license, and just the practical things that many refugees would need upon arriving here. Government-sponsored refugees have to rely on the bureaucrats and the government programs, and those aren't adequate. So we've seen many people come and live for a very long time in hotels without any job training, without any language training, and that's not good for the refugee. It's not good for the taxpayer, because we're supporting someone without giving them the opportunities to integrate and become employed. So I would put a much greater emphasis on privately sponsored refugees, because that allows a better integration process for people coming here. But fundamentally, Canada's security needs to come first. We need to make sure that we have adequate resources to make sure that we're doing proper screening, that we're making sure that we're not just looking at a piece of paper, but we're actually doing an in-depth study of who each applicant is. And we have to remember that there are people who are following the rules and waiting in dangerous spots in a lot of different countries. And if I can add one more thing, in many areas, the most vulnerable aren't even safe in the camps. religious minorities in many of these places aren't even safe in the refugee camps. So by taking them solely out of the refugee camps, we're missing the truly vulnerable. And I have also said that Canada needs to use its diplomatic clout to put pressure on countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Qatar, to do their part, to help. It's in the region. They have a lot of similarities in culture and
their
legal
resources
background.
too, the
And
financial resources
yes.
too, because here the taxpayers' money is being wasted on them.
Right.
Beyond-
Canada can do its part, but we have to do more
We
to
can
make sure
play
that
a
every
positive
country
role, but has to
is
be
doing
done
its
in a
part.
proper manner. Thank you.
So, Kamini and Ravina, you are good listeners, I know, but you have any question, please?
Yes, okay. I just want to ask you a simple question. If you are elected as the leader of your party, you must have some plans for the community. And as Canada has multicultural community, so I just want to know your plan in brief.
Well, basically, it would be replicating what Jason Kenney was able to do by not just telling you that we're an inclusive party and that we respect the contributions you've made, but being there in your community. And we need to do a better job at outreach. We need to have do a better job with our MPs in your community, attending your events, meeting with your community leaders, understanding what the issues are from you, from the grassroots in that community, and then taking action when they go to Ottawa. So I want to greatly enhance our dynamic relationship. I want to have an open door policy with members of the community, and I want you to have an open door policy with me, that when we have issues that we want to talk to you about, we have a way of doing that. And when you have issues you need to talk about, that you have access to our caucus, to our party, so that we can make sure that we're reflecting your concerns as well.
So my question, finally, I'm a woman, and it's been a huge issue for a long time that physically men and women are different. That's for sure. We have different areas too. But when we come to the question of rights and obligations, we come to the point, we have reached to the point where we talk about individual rights. We do not discuss about anymore men and women as a separate entity. But I feel like my rights, which I have reached through this country to a point where I feel like we are very blessed if we see around the world that how many ways we are being given the rights, but now they are being challenged in so many ways because of certain political reasons. I don't want to see a very suffocated and very chauvinist world in future, and I enhance that by educating my children that we are individualistic society. So what is conservatives' stance for women equality and women rights? What do you think, if you are going to be a prime minister, how would you take that challenge, which is clearly into our social system and penetrating very fast? So I would like to know your point of view.
Well, I have very strong women who work on my team and in my life, and I've always been a big believer in not just saying that we believe in women's equality, but in showing it and living it. The Conservative Party has had 3 female leaders. We've had, well, more than that if you count both legacy parties, but Kim Campbell was the first Prime Minister, female Prime Minister of Canada. Rona Ambrose right now is our leader. She's the second leader of our party, 3 if you include Deb Gray. So we have a lot of strong women who have been leaders of our party. The critical thing is to make sure that women are treated equally, that women have equal access and equal opportunity. I think where the Liberals lose the respect of many women is when they achieve political targets or quotas, but it's not based on merit, and it almost looks like kind of pandering, or that they're not fully respecting the contributions of some of the women that are on the team. I know that when our leader ran for the leadership, Rona Ambrose, she did not highlight the fact that she was a woman. She spoke about her experience and her merit and why she deserved it on the qualifications and deserved it on the hard work that she had done. And we elected her our leader. We have an open system in our party that gives women the same opportunities to run for nominations. and the same process to jump through, so that when a woman wins a nomination in our party, it's because they've gone through the exact same process as a man, and they're sitting at the table because they deserve to be there just as much as anybody else. And I think that's a better approach. I think it's a better approach to make sure that women know they have the exact same opportunity, the exact same access to the party and to the nominations and things like that, and then go through the exact same process. I think that the policies that I believe that the policies that the Conservative Party articulate are very pro-women. You know, we are the party that wanted to recognize matrimonial property rights on reserves for our First Nations. Many First Nations communities in this country, women don't have the same rights as non-First Nations. If they are in a situation of abuse, they have to leave the house, they have to leave it on reserve. That can mean devastating effects. We wanted to give those rights to those women. It was actually the Liberals who voted against that. So we have a very strong track record on promoting and achieving equality for women.
We do have 3 minutes more, and I'll take one brief, quick questions from Meena, SP, and Asif.
We have two young ladies here. What would be your message to the youth? To the youth of this country?
To the youth.
And by the way, Andrew also got elected as member parliament as the youngest parliament at the time.
And a conservative.
That's right. I think young people, we need, as a Conservative Party, we need to convince young people that they should be interested in the fiscal situation, because when the Liberals run up a $20-30 billion deficit, that's your money. You will be paying that back long after the politicians are gone, and your taxes, you'll have to work a little bit harder every year to pay the interest on the debt that's being racked up, and ask yourself, where is it being spent? You know, yes, governments have run deficits in the past, and sometimes it's because they've had to fund important projects or get Canada through a very deep recession. But we're not seeing that now. We're seeing Canada not in recession. We're seeing a lot of money being spent, and it's like people running up a bill on your credit card and you don't get any benefit from it. So my focus as leader will be try to articulate our fiscal and economic positions and our social positions in a way that young people can find relevant and understand that it's meaningful to them. So I'd love to have your help as I try to formulate that.
We've already empowered them.
Oh, thank you.
And the last brief question from Asif, please.
I have a very concerned question. Real estate prices are going high and high, and the first-time home buyers and the new immigrants, the real estate is out of their reach. So when you will be in power, do you have something to cope with this situation?
Well, first let me say I'm very aware of the situation. I have cousins who grew up in neighborhoods now when they were children, and now that they're able to afford homes, they can't afford homes even in the neighborhood that they grew up, but yet they're making more money than their parents did. But the housing market has gone so crazy that they have to move further and further away. So we're seeing new developments far northern, much more northern areas of the GTA. In Vancouver, it's the same issue. You've got a lot of money coming in from offshore that's driving up prices. So we need to make sure that our CMHC rules are not being taken advantage of by non-Canadians. You know, people, investors from around the world should not be able to use our public system.
Would you put a ban on the second-time or third-time buyers or the investors and give some opportunity, mandatory, like 50% allocation in the new development for the first-time home buyers, and any subsidy from the government side?
That's an interesting proposal. I haven't yet formulated my entire housing policy, partly because as running for leadership, you know, where there's some focus on other areas. But once I'm leader of the opposition, we'll certainly put a lot of resources into coming up with a conservative-based approach, a free market-based approach to the housing issue. And one thing that I can commit to is we've had the home buyers plan for first-time home buyers, where they're able to take money out of their RSPs and use that for a down payment. But that amount that they're allowed to take out needs to keep track with inflation. And also the GST rebate is the levels that the GST rebate is eligible is outdated because of inflation, because the home prices have gone up. It gets capped and you get maxed out and it's not eligible over a certain amount. But I think it's, you know, that a house that was $450,000 15 years ago is now maybe $1 million. And so a lot of Canadians are buying homes that sound like they're very expensive because they're $800,000-900,000, but they're just buying the same kind of home that their parents were able to buy. So we need some policies to reflect the new reality of what housing prices, where housing prices have gone in this country.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you very much, panelists and viewers. You are watching TAG TV's show. Thank you for watching.
#1 multicultural channel. This is TAG TV.